Namaste everyone, my name is Venu Krishnadas, and probably most of you are wondering what the hell is this workshop actually about, right? So we see there's a very common theme since the dawn of time that myth and stories have been the connective tissue that weaves together families, communities, societies, and nations. And we want to explore deeply today some myths from around the world and what are myths. And I also want to touch upon ritual, ceremony, and trance, because all of these things are connected. And perhaps when we hear the word myth, we think, this is something ultimately fictitious. Ultimately, these myths, they're not real. They're a way that our ancestors have, due to their lack of technological advancement, have explained certain phenomena in the natural world that now we understand in the so-called age of reason through logic and rationale and scientific investigation. But actually, myths are still very much prevalent today. So we want to explore all of these things and give you a deeper actual sense into what is myth and how to really receive the transmission that comes through these timeless stories. So my invitation to you today is not just to listen to this from your head and just take it in from an intellectual level and think, oh, maybe this is a nice story, but it's not relevant to my life. My invitation to you is actually really open yourself up and how to really sense into these stories so you can really be more receptive to receive the deeper transmission and the interweaving threads that permeate all of creation that are contained within these stories. So we'll cover some practices today to actually help you do this. So this is some of the things I want to explore today. And some researchers, they have suggested that ritual enactment predates written language. Of course it predates written language, but predates verbal language. So before people could speak and converse, they were ritually enacting what they were experiencing in the natural world. And we see at the heart of so many traditional wisdom cultures around the world, ceremony and ritual is integral to their society. And repeated repetition really breaks us through our ordinary waking state of consciousness so we can be more in tune with the deeper threads of reality. And a very common denominator through these various traditions around the world is sound and music. Most traditions around the world have some form of sound and music that brings people together. And sound transcends ethnicity, it transcends religion, it transcends belief system. Everyone can connect through sound, and we see it today. Every evening the dance tents are going. It doesn't matter what your religion, your belief system, people are coming together and having a good time. That's a certain kind of trance. But there's some commonalities there from traditional trance induction. So I want to talk a little bit about that today. We'll begin with a little bit of Om chanting. I think everyone knows Om. So make yourself comfortable, sit up nice and tall, and relax the sitting bones down into the earth, or relax the soles of the feet into the earth, and really feel into Mother Earth beneath you, supporting you. Perhaps close the lips and gently breathe in and out through the nose. Take a few deep breaths in and out. Let go of the thinking mind. Feel into the openness and the relaxation at the bottom of the exhale. As the parasympathetic nervous system begins to activate, enter into a state of letting go with each exhalation. And just feel what that feels like in your body. Taking a deep breath in and a deep breath out. A couple more times. And then when you're ready, taking a deep breath in for Om. All together. Mantra in your mind and the mind in the mantra. is to invoke auspiciousness. Do a little bit more kirtan throughout the class. I want to start with one poem. This is by a Muslim mystic, and he wrote one book of poetry called The Secret Rose Garden. This was about 900 years ago. This bouquet of scented blossoms I have plucked from that garden, and I have called it the secret rose garden. In it are blooming roses of the mysteries of the heart, untold before. In it the tongue of the lilies are all singing, and the eyes of the narcissus behold all far and near. Gaze on each one of these with your heart's eyes till your doubts melt away. You will see tradition, earthly and mystical truths, all arranged clearly in knowledge of detail. Do not seek with cold eyes to find blemishes, or the roses will turn to thorns as you gaze. Ingratitude is a sign of ignorance, for those who know the truth are thankful. When you remember me, breathe, mercy be upon me. I am ending with my own name. O Allah, grant me the loaded end. See but one, say but one, and know but the one. In former times, before there was social media, before there was cell phones, and before we lived in the age of distraction, our ancestors, they lived in a living world. Everything was alive. Everything was a person, and everything had a story. And we see it's a common theme in all cultures around the world that they were in communion with the personalities of the river, of the sea, of the forest, of the mountain, because everything is actually a person. This may seem a little bit of a stretch to our material intelligence in modern times, but as anyone goes into deeper and deeper states of meditation, then you can connect to these various personalities of reality. So perhaps you know there used to be one great Greek poet, and his name was Orpheus, and he used to play the lyre, like a harp. I was going to play some harp music, but they don't really want me using electronics in this class, unfortunately. It would have been a nice embellishment, but anyway. So he just got married to his beloved, the love of his life. And in Greek histories, Orpheus is poetry personified, because everything has its own personal form. So his beloved Eurydice, forgive my pronunciation, they had just got married, the perfect couple, the perfect Hollywood romance. Everyone was so happy for their marriage. And shortly after they got married, then Eurydice, she got bitten by a snake, and then she died. And Orpheus was completely heartbroken. And his poetry was so powerful and so moving that the trees, they used to get up, just like in Lord of the Rings, and they would start to walk and follow Orpheus as he was playing on his harp. And even the rocks, they would tumble and follow him. And so Orpheus was completely heartbroken at losing the love of his life. So then he made a determined vow, I want to get back my beloved. So then he took his lyre, he took his harp, and he went to the river Styx, and he was playing such beautiful poetry on the harp that the boatmen took him across the river. And he charmed the three-headed guard dog, and he went down, 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 and usually it wasn't so easy, but somehow he got access into the underworld. And then in the underworld, he met Hades and his wife Persephone. And he explained his case to Hades and Persephone. And then he started to play his harp. And the music was so beautiful, and it struck deep into the heart of Hades. And Hades and Persephone, they began to weep. Tears were flowing from their eyes. And Hades says, all right, you can take her back to the upper world, but on one condition. She's to follow behind you, and you cannot look back to see if she's following you. And you just have to keep walking towards the light. So off they went. And Orpheus was overjoyed. He was reunited with his beloved. Because it's one thing to long for the beloved, but when you actually meet the beloved and then you're separated, then that longing becomes 10 million times more intense. Because once you've had some experience of the beloved, then the separation burns like a fire, 1,000,000 times more intense than prior meeting. So Orpheus was walking, he was walking gradually, up. And then in some versions of the story, he couldn't check his excitement. And just before he was about to step out into the light, he looked around to see, oh, is she still following me? And just that, ever been impatient before? So he turned around, and then she fell. And she was reaching out, but she fell back down into the underworld. The gates closed. Orpheus was back on the upper world, and that was it. Forever banished of being united with his beloved. So what was Orpheus's poetry like after that? Rocks would melt. Their heart, solid stone, would become liquefied by the heartbreaking poetry of Orpheus. And remember, Orpheus is poetry personified. So any poetry that you hear today from this perspective is channeling something from Orpheus. So all these pop love songs you hear today about breaking up with your little girlfriend or whatever, this is channeling one drop of the heartbreak of Orpheus. So when you start to feel into, everything becomes alive, even Britney Spears songs. It can be udipana to remember something much deeper. So Orpheus, he composed so many hymns, and later in his life, he was just composing hymns to the god Apollo. And the forest nymphs, they approached him and they wanted to become his wives, but he denied them, and they become quite upset about this. Hell have no fury like a woman scorned. So then they ended up cutting him to pieces, and they threw him into the river along with his harp. And as his head was floating down the river, he was still playing his harp. And so if you go, if you are in a state of deep grief, you've maybe lost a loved one, lost someone very close to you, your budgies died, go and sit by a body of water, by a river, by the ocean. There's something very healing and soothing for the human heart, and that's because the poetry of Orpheus can still be heard there. So when you go and sit by a river, I invite you next time, try to hear the poetry, the hymns of Orpheus playing on his lyre. So when we hear these stories, the world opens up into something much, much greater than the modern myth that actually this world is just a random collection of atoms and somehow life is an accident. Because this is only a hypothesis. This itself is actually a myth. There's no scientific validation for this hypothesis. So myths are still alive today, but the modern myths are actually incredibly destructive, and this is leading to more and more depression, more and more suicide, more and more health defects, because the modern narratives are completely disconnected from being in harmony with the deeper universal truths that the myths of our ancestors were in tune with. So we are very much author and explorer Barry Lopez, I don't think he's related to Jennifer. He has a nice little analogy. If you're driving down the road a long way and then you realize, oh, I've gone down the wrong road, then you can do two things. You can turn around and go back the way you came, or you can pull over and ask a local, oh, is there some little back shortcut that I can get onto my intended route? So in modern times, particularly in Western culture, there is an increasing movement to see the value that was held in traditional wisdom systems. And we are pulling over to the side of the road and we are asking them. We are going to the yoga class, we are going to so many classes of indigenous wisdom systems, because we're starting to realize, hey, we've gone down the wrong road, and this road is actually the highway to hell. And it's not working out for us. But paradoxically, in many of these cultures, like I've just spent a good amount of time in India, the Western people are flocking to India to get the knowledge, and the Indian people are flocking to the Western mentality. It's ironic how this world works. So now I want to explore a little bit how to actually cultivate the body as a temple of listening. So we're not just hearing from a place of the intellect or through the mind, because it's one thing to hear these stories and like, oh, that's a nice entertaining story, and oh, you know, there's a couple of wisdom gems in there, but it's not really going to change your life. It's not going to really somatically connect you deeper to the universal process. And in modern times, we are so visually addicted. The main organ of perception is through the eyes, and particularly, humans long to go into trance, because in trance we break through the relative and mundane waking state of consciousness. And this is not just a trance of going away on a shamanic weekend and dancing around the fire or attending the shamanic workshop or whatever. We're always in trance, actually. Can anyone think of modern ways, every day, how do we get into trance? Anyone got any ideas?
Start scrolling.
Absolutely. How many of us go into the phone trance every day, sucked into this vortex? And people are paid millions and millions and millions of dollars to keep you captivated in that trance. Because when you're in those kinds of trance, we can sell you things very, very easily. So these people know there's a deep longing in the deeper aspects of the human being to go into trance, because there's an intuitive felt sense that something's inherently wrong with how we're living, and particularly in the youth. Like New Zealand has the highest suicide rate in the developed world. What's up with that? Because New Zealand's beautiful. We have healthcare, we have roads. Why are the children killing themselves? Because they can feel we're going down the wrong road at a rapid rate. And so then, to distract ourselves from this, we enter into the trance states that the society propagates. Television, cinema, pop songs, phone, all these kinds of things which take us further and further in the wrong direction. But there's this inherent universal propensity that we long to go to trance. So I've just spent some time in Goa, and there's a lot of psych trance. Goa is the home of psych trance, and there's some universal commonalities for trance induction. Often it's a repetitive musical beat, and by repetition and absorption in this sound vibration, then we transcend our awareness being absorbed in the small limited self. And when we transcend the confinement of being the small little suffering human going to work 9 to 5, being stuck in your mundane life, it feels really good. So that's why every Friday night, so many people go to the pub, get on the piss, listen to the same songs that they've been listening to for the last 30 years, and because it takes them into trance. They get out of the little mundane persona that they exist in at least 5 days of the week, and that feels really good to escape that. However, not all trances are the same, and we should choose our trance very, very carefully, because the methodology upon which we are entering trance has its own energetic component to it, and that energetic component leaves a residue in our consciousness. So some trances will lead to the continued expansion and elevation of our consciousness, and other trances, when you come out of that method, they'll actually make you more contracted. So for example, I know lots of people who are really into surfing, and from a basic mechanics point of view, trance comes about by concentration, focus, and absorption. And when you're on the wave, you have to be fully absorbed to be in balance, right? You can't be thinking about what you had for lunch last week, this or that. So you're fully absorbed in the moment. So this is a kind of quasi-samadhi, and that feels really good. And then so people say, surfing is my meditation. So there's some universal meditative techniques that they're tapping into there, of being fully absorbed in the moment. However, and people say, yeah, surfers are really chill people, you know, but just go 2 weeks of flat conditions, no waves, just see how chill they are then. Or even, I lived in Raglan for a long time, famous left-hand surf break. People come from all over the world, and you know, the locals, they'll punch people in the head out on the water and all kinds of stuff, because this is my temporary, momentary wave that belongs to me. And it's totally ridiculous. But what they're actually addicted to is going into that trance state just very, very briefly. So, and it's the same thing with plant medicines or euthanogens. Like one Swami, he gives a nice example. If you're lost in the forest and you're trying to get to your destination, but you don't quite know where to go, so then you climb up a very, very tall tree and you get an overview and you see, oh, my destination is there. This is a real experience, and it can be a real insight of deeper levels of reality and where you need to go. But you still need to climb down the tree and walk through the forest to get there. So people can become, again, addicted to that kind of having an inorganic support to get to this trance state. Inorganic, I mean something outside of themselves. So if you're always reliant to get into these trance states by having something outside of yourself, then particularly in the drugs and whatnot, then this also becomes very destructive to the system, because that has its own energetic effects on the body as well. So they can give you real insight, but ultimately we need to cultivate an organic methodology and technique that we can access these deeper states of realization at any time. So in this current age, the most effective natural methodology to go into trance is mantra, and this word mantra is comprised of 2 words, manas and trayate. Manas means mind, and trayate means that which delivers. So that which delivers you from the confinements of your own material mind, that is a mantra. Because perhaps you've noticed, the mind's always giving commentary to everything. Like you're sitting here and you're thinking, oh, this guy's pretty boring, I should have gone to another workshop, or maybe I should get a cacao, when's he gonna finish, blah blah blah. Everything I'm saying, you're not even hearing it exactly, you're hearing it through the filter of your own internal narrative. It's like if you're listening to the radio, you're listening to some sports game, and there's a little commentator giving a commentary on the sports game, right? So your mind's like that, giving a commentary to everything. And most of this time, this commentary is completely removed from reality, and it's completely conditioned by your previous experience. So what is it to connect to reality without the filter of your own internal mental commentator? What's that actually like? For most of us, we have actually zero experience of it. It's completely foreign to us because all we know is the internal commentator that's giving commentary to everything. So we don't even know actually what reality is like as it is. We only know it through the filter of our own collected impressions, which form an internal narrator. So to come out of your mind, mantra, this is very good. So this is an invitation for you. On that note, let's do a little bit of kirtan. So a lot of people, if we think of the divine, can be a triggering word, but if we think of God, I'll use the term divine, because a lot of people have religious trauma, quite valid religious trauma, particularly born in the West, because as soon as people hear the word God and religion, it triggers deep within their psyche all the absolute nonsense that's gone on in the name of God and religion for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, which actually has nothing to do with God. It has everything to do with man's egoic agenda for politics and control and power, and we mix the two. So it's impossible to actually see something as it is when we're coming from a trauma response. So that's a whole nother class, God and religious trauma, but maybe next year. But it's something to be very aware of. So a lot of people, they shy away from personifying the God in some way, because particularly for the last 2,000 years there's been a very prominent flavor of religion on this planet, and it's not always so loving. And particularly if we're born in a Western country, even if we're not religious, that impression and conception of God is basically our religious foundational thinking, and it forms the cognitive process for religion. It's like a default position, and so this can be very triggering for people. And a lot of people, they try to know the Father, they try to know God through their own mental speculation, but the actual only way to know the Father is through the mother, because the mother knows who the Father is. Yeah, if you have some child and the child can't figure out who's the Father by themselves, but the mother knows for sure. I mean, in modern times, maybe sometimes it's a bit hazy, but so the scriptures of the world, they have been cognized in trance, and these scriptures, they have been also cognized in different levels of trance. And so there used to be universal culture all over the world, and this culture was called Vedic culture, and it was all over the planet. And so just like when you buy some cell phone, computer, refrigerator, you get the user manual. So every time God actualizes the creation of the universe, then he gives the user manual. That user manual is called Veda. Veda means knowledge. How to work in cooperation and harmony with the universe. But often, particularly if you're in a male body, when you get the cell phone, you throw away the packaging and the user manual, and you just try to figure it out by yourself. And then after maybe some hours, you just kind of shyly reach back in and get that user manual and look it out. So in modern times, that's why people are gravitating towards these older traditional wisdom systems, because they're closer to the authentic user manual. And so we're trying to go looking back to go forward, how this user manual can inform us for modern times. So this universal user manual, the knowledge used to be all over the earth, and this user manual is also called Veda, Veda Mata, the mother who can show you the Father. So it's in this context is feminine. The mother can this knowledge, this divyagan, this transcendental knowledge, she's of a feminine quality because everything's a person. And so we can address these personalities and create a relationship and also get their mercy by creating a personal relationship with them. So we'll do a little kirtan to Saraswati, Shuddha Saraswati. Because there's two forms of Saraswati. Saraswati related to the material manifestation, and then Shuddha Saraswati, who's completely pure and gives transcendental knowledge. So I want to do a little kirtan to Shuddha Saraswati. So the words are Saraswati, 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 Shuddha Saraswati. Clear as mud? Shuddha. Shuddha means pure. Saraswati, oldest known musical instrument is about 60 to 70,000 years old, and that's a little flute carved out of a bear thigh bone. So sometimes, often propagated and in the back of our consciousness, that the Paleolithic man was like some hairy Neanderthal man running around, clubbing a woman, dragging her into the cave, just trying to survive, being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. But actually, all studies have confirmed that our Paleolithic ancestors had more leisure time than we do right now. So everyone stuck in the rat race is actually less advanced than the Paleolithic ancestors. And we think we're very advanced in the age of logic, rationale, and reason. But how logical, rational, and reasonable is it that our modern lifestyle is toxifying the planet for every single person that lives on it? In many First Nation traditions, if they make any decision, they have to think 7 generations in front of them. Imagine if our political leaders were making all decisions based on 7 generations. How would that look? A lot different to, we can't imagine, So, it was so pertinent and important for this man or woman to carve this bear thigh bone into a little flute, and rather just running around away from the mammoth or the saber-toothed tiger, it was so vitally important for them to sit down and create this instrument for music. It was so important to them to connect to beauty and to love, because this is really what moves us. So just feel into it for a moment. What was it like for this Paleolithic ancestor to play this flute? And who were they playing the flute to? Were they playing to the moon? Were they playing to the sun? What was their conception of the higher reality? And how were they listening to the sound of this flute? Were they just listening from the mental platform and then filing it away in a little box in their head? Or were they listening with actually you can try this. With this ring finger on one hand, stimulate and go in a circle on the hand. This activates the hand chakra. And your sensitivity will become very, very heightened by this. And then the same thing on the other side. And then rest the palms on the knees, palms facing up. And then just feel into what's it like listening to sound through the palms of the hands, through the soles of the feet, through the legs, through the hips, through the trunk of the body, through the throat, the arms, the head. What's it like to listen and receive sound through the crown of the head? Through the hair, through the air around our body, extending our field of receptivity. Really feel into it. What's it like to receive and feel into sound using the entire body and our field of awareness as the instrument of cognition and receptivity? Not just limiting it to the ears. So in modern times, silence is an endangered species. And there's about only 3 places in America that you can go for about 15, 30 minutes without hearing some interruption of a plane going overhead or some interruption from the sound of man. So as this world becomes more colonized by modern technology, places undisturbed by man's influence becoming more and more and more reduced.
How can you focus? Like, how can you explain all of this with all the noise around and people singing?
How can you listen?
We have to listen from a place of silence. But often when we hear this word silence, the commentator steps in. Let me just tell you what silence means. So, is it not so? So, silence means emptying all thoughts and completely devoid of sound and some kind of nothingness. Then the mind will really start to crank up the stereo and your mind will become crazy with thoughts. So, actually, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, of all secret things, I am silence. And the silence that I'm pointing to here is not a silence that is devoid of content. It's not devoid of sound, and it's not devoid of experience, because everything actually arises in a field of silence. But we're so absorbed in the content of our consciousness that we don't allow ourselves to feel in and remain connected to the ever-present silence that's always there. You don't need to learn some fancy yoga asana of wrapping your foot round your head and doing some shamanic course in Peru and taking ayahuasca 10 million times and getting some degree and paying thousands of dollars. Silence is always there. It's free. It's very simple. But we're so enamored in the internal noise and the external noise that we don't allow ourselves to actually just connect into the silence. So perhaps, this is a little story from the early Christian Gnostics. And there was one king and one queen, and they had a son, and they had a very nice, colourful Technicolor Dreamcoat. And it was the son's inheritance to receive this very bright tapestry coat. And so the son came of age, and he said, I want to wear that coat now. And the parents said, okay, but first we have a little mission for you. And there's a pearl at the bottom of the ocean, and we want you to retrieve that pearl. And when you retrieve that pearl, you can take the coat and you can claim your inheritance as the king. The pearl is in the ocean off the coast of Egypt. So you need to go and retrieve that pearl. So off he went, walking many days, many weeks, many months, and then he arrived in Cairo. And he came across the markets in Cairo. Much noise, much distraction, nice smells, nice food. Laz Tao says in the Tao Te Ching, the great way is easy, but people prefer the side paths. Silence is easy. To connect with the Supreme Reality is very, very easy. But we're like, oh, what's that smell? Oh, I just go here, just go there. Like little children, just following here and there the sense impressions. Always getting enamored by the side paths of Cairo. Here and there, here and there, here and there. And so he got completely lost for a long time. And then so his parents sent one falcon to go and give him a reminder. So then the falcon arrived in the market of Cairo, and they met that son. He met that son. And then the falcon said, very simple, to the prince, remember why you're here. You started this mission to retrieve the pearl. There's a very old mantra in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Om asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityoma amritam gamaya. Oh, lead me from darkness to light so I can obtain the nectar of immortality. We have this very precious human birth, but we are essentially, most of us are living like glorified animals just getting distracted in the marketplace of distraction. And there's no guarantee in your next birth that you will have a human birth again. You can go right down the species, and since beginningless time, you have been transmigrating from body to body, from species to species, in accordance with your desire and your karma. And right now you have this very precious human birth to get out of this very limited, contracted state of consciousness. And this is what the youth are perceiving on some intuitive level. All of us here, we're all looking and searching for the same thing, to Amrit, the nectar of immortality, to be situated in our eternal spiritual consciousness. But we're so enamored with the side paths. So then the falcon said, remember why you're here. And then that prince woke up and said, yes, I'm here to find the pearl. So then he went out to the ocean. And he went into the ocean, and the serpent was guarding the pearl. How to tame the serpent. The serpent represents the monkey mind, and you cannot obtain the nectar of immortality when the mind's always in a state of oscillation and confusion. Patanjali says in Yoga Sutras, given the definition of yoga, yogas trisa vritti nirodha. When the lake of the mind's very clear, then very easily you can be situated in your own spiritual consciousness, your own true nature. And if you're not situated in your own true nature, you're lost in the fluctuating states of the mind. He doesn't give a third option. Oh yeah, sometimes you're alright, sometimes you're either in truth or you're in illusion. No third option. Very profound, actually. So you can take your own pulse and see where you're at. So he enchanted the serpent in the ocean by singing to it. By singing the divine melodies, the mind became calm. The mantra delivered him from the serpent of the mind, and then he could retrieve the pearl and obtain the nectar of immortality. He got his coat and everything was nice. Lived happily ever after, as they say. So one technique to feel into these stories, it's called feeding the story. So there may be particular aspects of these stories because they touch upon universal, timeless themes that man or woman, transgender, whatever you identify with, they always go through. Regardless of time, place and circumstance, nothing's new under the sun. It's the same, what mythologist Joseph Campbell calls the hero's journey. We are all here because we hear the call, like the call of a distant river. But we hear the call intuitively, deep in the soul, deep in the heart. We know it, we hear it, we feel it. But we're so distracted by the side paths. So we're just like, how can I follow the call but still bring my side paths along with me? It doesn't quite work like that. So one way to feed the stories is there may be a particular character, a particular aspect that really you can identify or resonate with. And then at the end of the story, sometimes we can do what's called feeding the story by going around and saying, just for example, I am the falcon, or I am the character lost in the markets of Cairo, or I have obtained the pearl at the bottom of the ocean, or I am the restless serpent. And in this way, there's one technique to feel into the story, and it becomes more alive for you. So one other story is coming to mind. Once there was one little mouse, and that little mouse, he lived with his friends and family in a stand of trees, an intentional mouse permaculture community, non-vaxxed. And they were all living very happily. And little mouse, sometimes he would hear a roar in his ears, and sometimes he would tell his friends, do you hear that sound? And the other mice would say, no, then we don't hear nothing. What sound? What are you talking about? Just stop being strange. Just follow the norm. Follow the science. We don't hear any sound. So just go back to what you're doing. Go back to your job 9 to 5 and pay your taxes. So this carried on. He was going about his mouse business. But every now and again, the sound would come back in his ear. I had some nice water sound effects for all of this, but another time. So one day it got too much and he decided, I must follow this sound. So then he packed his little mouse bag, he left his little permaculture non-vax mouse community, and off he went into the grass. But this was very terrifying, because for most of us, we will actually stay in our suffering, internally conceived mental prison because it's familiar. And to step out into the unknown is the most scariest thing. But little mouse had the courage. He embarked on the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is calling all of us. And this hero's journey is a theme in all traditions around the world. Omasatoma tamasoma jyotirgamaya. Come out of the darkness. But you have to have courage. You know, when the Māori would go out on the waka, then they would have to pull up the anchor. And to pull up the anchor took great strength. So they would get the strong person to pull up the anchor. The analogy, the metaphor here is not physical strength, as it takes courage, it takes inner strength to leave the safety of the shore. And you don't know what's on the other side. But the only way you can really know what's on the other side is to pull up the anchor fully and cross the ocean. So little mouse, he was going through the grass. What predators could be out there, he doesn't know. But he had to follow that intuition, to follow the sound. So he went through the grass into scenery he's never seen before. And then he heard a voice. Hello, brother. And he looked around, he was startled. And he saw it was Brother Raccoon. And then the raccoon said, hello, little mouse. What are you doing out here? And little mouse said, I keep hearing a roar, a sound in my ears, and I have to investigate what is this sound. And Brother Raccoon said, that sounds the river. I'll take you to the river. And little mouse said, what's the river? Never heard of the river. And little Mr. Raccoon said, follow me. So off they went further through the grass, unknown territory for the little mouse, and the sound of the roar got louder, louder, and louder. And then they came to the bank of the river. And the river was so vast, little mouse from his position, he couldn't even see the other side, the other bank of the river. And he was watching sticks and leaves floating down the current of the river, the grass swaying back and forth in the breeze, the trees on the bank of the river. And then Brother Raccoon said, I have to leave now, but I want to introduce you to a friend. And then little mouse heard a voice. Hello, brother. And he looked around, and it was Brother Frog. And Brother Frog said, hello, little mouse. And then they got into a conversation. And Brother Raccoon left. And Brother Frog asked little mouse, do you want some medicine? And little mouse said, yeah, I want some medicine. And Brother Frog said, I want you to crouch down really, really low as you can possibly get. Crouch down, and then I want you to spring up and jump up high. And then little mouse thought, this is strange medicine. Okay. So he crouched down as low as he could possibly get, and then he sprung up higher and jumped higher than he'd ever jumped before. And in the height of his jump, he jumped above the grass. He'd never seen above the grass before. And he got a view of the river. And over the grass, in the distance, he saw the mountains. He's never seen the mountains ever in his existence. Whoa, what was that? Plop! And then he fell into the river. And now he scurried back to the shore, and he said to Brother Frog, you tricked me. Now I'm all wet. And then Brother Frog said, maybe, but don't forget what you saw when you jumped up in the air. And Little Mouse thought about it. He's like, yeah, that was pretty astonishing. So then Little Mouse went back to his intentional permaculture, non-vax mouse community, crypto, fair trade, organic currency. And he was all soaking wet still. And Little Mouse told his friends and associates, I've just went to the river. You guys should come with me. And then his associates who follow the science said, we don't believe in any river. We think you're a little bit crazy. You should pull your head in. But we do see you're all wet. So probably some creature tried to eat you and actually tasted that you're poisonous and spat you back out. So you're probably poisonous to us too. So we're not sure we really want you around. And then Little Mouse, he felt a bit ostracized. And he's like, I want to go to the mountains. So then he repacked his little mouse bag and he decided to leave that place. So he left and then went through the grass, went through all new territory, all new scenery he'd never seen before in his life, traveling for a long time. Then he heard a voice, hello, brother. And he looked around and there was one really old man mouse with a walking cane and glasses. And in that area, there was a lot of abundance of food. All kinds of seeds and fruits and nuts. And it was getting twilight, it was getting dusk. And the old mouse said to Little Mouse, why don't you come and stay the night? We can have dinner together. And Little Mouse was quite hungry, so he thought, yeah, okay, I'll come for dinner. So they sat down, and they were munching away on this abundance of food. And Old Mouse asked Little Mouse, where are you going? What are you doing out here? And Little Mouse said, I want to go to the mountains. And Old Mouse said, once I wanted to go to the mountains. That's how I ended up here. But then I found it was so beautiful here and things were so comfortable. I just decided to stay here. And I gave up on this notion of going to the mountains. What's that? I think you should give up on this notion of going to the mountains. Just stay here and be comfortable. So they finished dinner and Little Mouse thought, no, do or die. I must go to the mountains. So he left that place, traveling further and further, all new environments and scenery now. And then he heard a voice, hello, brother. And he looked around and there was one huge being lying on its side, wheezing, breathing very heavily, and this being was sick. This being was like a mountain to Little Mouse. And Little Mouse asked, what's your name? And that brother said, my name's Brother Buffalo. And Little Mouse said, you look sick. And Brother Buffalo said, yes, I'm very sick. And they tell me the only cure is the eye from a mouse. Little Mouse was shocked. And he was like, oh. But he was like, this is such a majestic, great creature. How can I be responsible for his death? This being must live. So then he got his little paw and he plucked out his eye and he gave it to Brother Buffalo. And Brother Buffalo was cured. And then Brother Buffalo asked, where are you going? And Little Mouse said, I want to go to the mountains. And Brother Buffalo, he said, I can take you across the plain region. You stay under me, and therefore no predators, no eagles, etc. can swoop down and take you. So Little Mouse, he walked under Brother Buffalo, and the ground was shaking, this huge being for Little Mouse. It was like an earthquake every time the hoof contacted the ground. So they were walking for a long, long, long time. And They got to the end of the plain region, and Brother Buffalo said, "This is as far as I can go. You'll have to go the rest of the journey by yourself." Little Mouse thanked him, and he continued his way. Now the path started to get more treacherous, more rocky. He was travelling, and there was getting less and less cover overhead, less and less grass, so he was more exposed to any overhead flying predators. He was walking. Then he heard a voice, "Hello, brother," and he looked around, and he saw another majestic creature lying on his side, wheezing. And Little Mouse said, "What's your name?" And that being said, "My name is Brother Wolf. What's your name?" And Little Mouse said, "People call me Little Mouse." And then Little Mouse asked, "What's wrong with you?" And Wolf said, "I'm sick. And they tell me the only cure is the eye of a mouse." Little Mouse was understandably a bit reluctant and quite shocked. But he understood. What else can I do? So he got his paw and he plucked out his eye. And he gave that to Brother Wolf. And Brother Wolf was cured. And he asked Little Mouse, "Where are you going?" Yeah. And Little Mouse said, "I want to go to the mountains. I have to go to the mountains." And Brother Wolf said, "I'll take you as far as I can take you. You walk under me to protect you from predators." So off they went, Little Mouse under Brother Wolf, walking, and Little Mouse sensing his way to the mountains, not seeing the world anymore of how he'd previously seen it. Let's take a breath. And that was the conduit through which he could move closer and closer to the mountains, giving up his previous commentator, his previous perspective on reality. And then Brother Wolf said, "This is as far as I can take you. You'll have to go the rest of your journey by yourself." Little Mouse thanked Brother Wolf, and Little Mouse carried on by himself, sensing his way to the mountains. Now the path was becoming particularly treacherous at this point, and he could feel and he could hear the sounds of falcons circling overhead, looking for prey. And sometimes he could sense the shadow casting over him as the falcons would circle above. Do or die, I must go to the mountains. So he carried on his way, sensing with his little whiskers, sensing with his entire body as a vehicle to perceive into the greater reality. The shadows were coming closer and closer. Little Mouse was so determined to get to the mountains. The shadows were coming closer and closer. The screams of the falcons were resonating more and more in his ears. Closer, 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 closer. Then everything went dark, and he felt the claws sink into his body. Everything went black. Everything went silent. Then he opened his eyes. He could see. And he was up a tree. Then he heard a voice. "Hello, brother." And he looked down, and it was Brother Frog. And as he looked down, he had feathers. he had wings. And Brother Frog said, "Oh, it's nice to see you again. It's been a long time." And then Brother Frog said, "By the way, we have a new name for you. Now, we call you Falcon." And that's the story of Little Mouse. So, I invite you to just do a little bit of quick round of feeding the story. You can just quickly raise your hand if there's any character thread that you resonate with. I'll start. I am Little Mouse, reluctant to give up his eyes sometimes, but knowing it's for my best interest. Anyone else want to share? Determination, yes.
Little mouse might have been eaten by a falcon.
Yes.
I think all little mouse here.
Yes. Yeah. Mm.
When Little Mouse finds old mouse, I don't know what his name is,
Mm.
and he decides to stay out of the comfort zone and go for his mission.
Mm.
He could have stayed.
I think I'm at a stage where it's like little mouse who's wet and has seen the river and seen the mountain and been back and has a beautiful environment, but is still just about to depart towards
Yeah.
the mountains.
The call is there. Anyone else want to share?
Little mouse that doesn't fit in with the other mouse.
Yes.
And they blame him.
So often when we hear these stories, in our addiction to logic and rationale, the default position of what does it mean? How's it relevant to my life? And then I can file it away a little box in my head and I think I've understood it. But this is not actually what these myths are pointing to. It's an entire visceral, tactile, somatic experience to enter into them. And the transmission that is available is far beyond, this was some nice lesson, like some dry university lecture. This is not what they're pointing to whatsoever. And so we're all hearing the call of the river. And some of us, the majority of the world, is just happy and staying in their little state of slumber. Some hear the call, but only go a certain way, like the old mouse, and become comfortable and conditioned by a feeling of satisfaction. And the very small number will do or die. I must go to the mountains. I must follow that sound, that call, all the way. What's that call? The call is we heard earlier about the oldest instrument was the flute. So that flute, that call of the divine, is actually the call of Krishna's flute. God is calling you. He's playing his flute. It's the divine sound, and it's calling all of us. Come back home. Come to your original consciousness. Don't get distracted by the side paths of Cairo. Don't go so far and become comfortable and conditioned by a feeling of satisfaction. So the saints, they are going all around the world. And one great saint, Prabodhananda Saraswati, in Radharasa Sudhanidhi, he says, Harikatha, these sacred pastimes about the Lord, this is the sound of Krishna's flute. So the saints are going all around the world. They are like instruments of the Lord calling you, calling you, calling you. If you take one step towards the divine takes 10 steps towards you. God has everything. He's Atmaram, self-satisfied, but the one thing he doesn't have is your love. And he's very greedy for more love. He wants that very much. Because, one name of Krishna is called Gopal. It means the butter thief. In the village of Vrindavan, when Krishna was here, he was very naughty. He would go around the village ladies' houses. He would break in during the day and he would steal the butter. What does it mean? There was one sage called Vidura, and Krishna came to visit his friend Vidura, the sage. But Vidura was out and his wife was there, Vidyarani. And Vidyarani, she was very, very ecstatic and excited to see Krishna's coming. So I should feed this guest. So then she got some bananas, and in her excitement, she peeled the bananas and threw away the banana and put the peel on the plate, and then she served it to Krishna. And then Krishna, he took this banana peel, and then he started to eat the banana peel. And then just then, Vidura came back in, and he saw my wife is serving Krishna banana peel. What is she doing? And then Krishna was eating the banana peel, and Vidura was going to say something, correct his wife. But Krishna said, no, you just stop. Because Krishna doesn't need bananas and he doesn't need banana peel. He is eating and receiving the love in the offering. So why is he going around stealing butter? He's stealing the love and affection that all the residents of Vrindavan have in their heart for Krishna. So God doesn't need anything, but he wants to be in loving reciprocation with us. And so this is the calling that we're all actually longing for, is to be fully seen and to be in a relationship of an eternal flow of love. So there has to be two, lover and beloved, in that, for there to be an exchange. So Krishna's flute is calling, but how long will we ignore this? And so much we are conditioned in black and white thinking. Either it's like this or it's like that. So this is the state of duality, and to actually just feel into this for yourself. How much time do you spend in resistance to reality? And you may think, well, this is a bit of a strange question. I'm not going around being in resistance to reality. What's this guy talking about? Actually, and what do I mean by reality? Relatively speaking, whatever is happening is reality. And why is it reality? Because it's happening. And because it's happening, it's reality. It doesn't mean that we have to like it. It doesn't mean that there's not scope for improvement. But when we're in a place of resistance, we're literally in resistance to reality. We're in resistance to God. We're in resistance to everything higher. So, and then we try to, with our egoic agenda, try to control and manipulate, and from this place of resistance, we want to manifest the world as how we want it to be. And this is actually incredibly disempowering, because it's much more empowering to be accepting of reality, and then so the majority of your energy is not getting dissipated from resistance, and then you can be more empowered to actually be a conduit for the upliftment of reality. So you can think about this. It's actually a very deep point. So perhaps one day there was one goddess in the forest with her maidens, and she was picking flowers. And she reached out for the narcissus flower. That has a whole nother backstory to it, but I won't go into it today. And just then, the ground opened up. There was a huge thunderous roar, and a large, strong man emerged from the ground and seized this goddess and took her down into the underworld, while she was still clutching the narcissus flowers in her hands. And as she was being pulled down into the underworld, she let out a scream. And then that crack in the earth closed, and her maidservants were distraught. Where is our goddess gone? And close by was her mother. So her mother's name was Demeter, and that goddess's name was Persephone. We heard about Persephone earlier. So Demeter was distraught at the loss of her daughter. And Demeter is the Greek goddess of agriculture and harvest. So in the distress of losing her daughter, all the harvest stopped, all the agriculture stopped. And Persephone was like the goddess of the luster of the earth, the luster and the innocence of the earth. So sometimes we look around and think, how can all of this be happening? How can the sacredness of the earth be violated like this? So then Demeter, she embarked on a search to retrieve and find her daughter, but there was no trace of her daughter anywhere. She went up to the Mount Olympus, no sign anywhere of Persephone. And then Demeter came in contact with Hecate, which is like a crow, who's the personification of magic, witchcraft, the being that sees everything. So Hecate heard the screams of Persephone as she was being pulled down into Hades, into the underworld. And Hecate said to Demeter, "Oh, Persephone, Hades has taken her." So this is the origin of the first winter in the Greek tradition, because Demeter was so distraught at the loss of her daughter, all harvest stopped, all growth of plants stopped, the trees started to lose their leaves, the earth became cold, the earth became stark. So this was the very first winter in Greek mythology. And then down in the underworld, Persephone, she actually wasn't in resistance to this. She accepted her position. And Hades, he built a throne for her on equal level as himself. And this was the first time Persephone had actually been treated as an equal, and actually treated as a woman, because Demeter wanted to keep her as a virgin for life and really treated her like a low down daughter, like no freedom. So although she was distraught of being a bit of a captive, she was also started to develop some love for Hades, because Hades was actually giving her respect. And she accepted her position, and she became queen of the underworld. So then Demeter, she traveled to the underworld and she met with Hades. And she petitioned Hades, "You must give back Persephone." And up to this point, Persephone, she had not eaten any food in the underworld. But someone in the underworld gave her a pomegranate, and she ate 6 seeds from the pomegranate. And then Hades agreed to Demeter's demands. "Okay, I will return Persephone." So then they approached Persephone and said, "You can come back to the upper world now." And then Hades saw, "Oh, but you've eaten some food." So food's very, very, very powerful, and it has the consciousness of everyone who's come in contact with that food. So because she has eaten the food, that created a contract that for 6 months of the year, she had to return back to the underworld. So if right now is autumn, just a few days ago, Persephone, she went back to the underworld. Now it's getting cold. Very soon the leaves will start to fall. Winter will be here, in separation of Persephone. And then in the springtime, it'll be her return. The buds on the ice will start to thaw, the buds will start to emerge, everything will become green, the flowers will start to come out in celebration of the return of Persephone. So, what are some of the things we can learn from this? These are the universal seasons. Just like there's breathing in and there's breathing out. So this expansion and contraction happens on the most minute scale right up to the largest manifestation in the spiritual world. Expansion and contraction. Expansion and contraction. And we're always engaged in a campaign against the contraction. And in this way, we're always out of alignment with reality. Particularly in our material experience, there'll always be expansion and contraction, because this is the very nature of this realm. So, because Persephone wasn't in resistance to this, she became the queen of the underworld. One thing you might say is that she became the queen of her shadow work because she wasn't in resistance to it, and she worked with it. Like a lot of people, they start to cry when it's raining or something like this, and because they spend too much time sitting in their office and totally removed. We're so removed from context in modern times. We drive our air-conditioned cars, we go to work in our little square box cubicle, air-conditioned, we come home to our air-conditioned house, we pull out our little square box phone and we enter into that trance. And with no fluctuations in temperature, variation, anything. We eat strawberries in the middle of winter that have been imported from the other side of the world. Totally fucking madness. And so, I've done a lot of gardening in my life. So it's very practical, and I can very much feel into the natural cycles of nature. And in the summertime, there's the abundance of the harvest, the abundance of the flowers. You have to spend so much time watering the garden. And the springtime's very busy composting, planting seeds. In the autumn, things begin to wind down. In the winter, it's a time for rest. So to be in harmony with the natural cycles of the natural world and to not be in resistance to them, this was the norm for our ancestors up to very, very recent times. And just like the Nile River in Egypt, she was considered during the rainy season to be like a pregnant woman. That womb swells during the pregnancy of the waters. And then in the summertime, it shrinks back. But in modern times, square box thinking, we want to delineate the river to flow in a straight line, and if it breaks its straight banks, then it's a big problem because we want to manipulate nature for our own enjoyment. And this consciousness permeates everything. And we just become more and more removed from the natural cycles of reality. And this is not just the external natural seasons, there's also internal natural seasons. Have you ever woke up and you're just like, oh, maybe the sun's shining outside and you just feel very bright today, very happy, very light. And then in a state of contracted consciousness, it's like if there's a fish swimming in the ocean. If there's a storm on top of the ocean, then that fish, because the ocean's so deep, it can just go down deeper into the ocean. But if you take that same fish and you put it in a teacup, any disturbance on the surface of that teacup, the fish really, really feels it. So when we're in a state of contracted consciousness, which is often brought about by fixating on always wanting to be in one particular state of consciousness all the time, which is one of the greatest prescriptions for suffering, is to try and, or I had some beautiful experience in 1972 when I was on mushrooms, and now my whole life is just trying to get back to that experience all the time. What a great prescription for suffering. Always trying to get back to something This is not meditation, actually. So meditation is a fluidity, an openness, a receptivity. Samadhi is a state of receptivity. This silence is a state of receptivity. And everything is singing its song. We just have to listen. So one of the things we can learn from this pastime of Persephone is to not be in resistance with the natural cycles of nature, externally and internally. And then you can become a king or queen of your own consciousness. And you'll come to a new level of consciousness. There's so much more I want to tell, but I've got to wind it up. There's so many stories. So this divine song is calling us. My invitation is try not to be in resistance to that. Try not to just become conditioned by a feeling of satisfaction like old mouse and only go so far. Because you have this very precious human birth for a very, very short time. Try to make the most of it. Try to reach the mountains in this birth. Because just by going to church, going to temple, it's subscribing to a particular belief system. It's not a lottery. You can't just buy your lotto ticket and then think, oh yeah, I'm sweet, at the end of the life I'll just get zapped up and go to heaven, or whatever is your concocted narrative. If you are not experiencing that divine consciousness here and now, you're not going to experience it when you drop the body. We have to follow the process to be abiding in that divine consciousness right here, right now. We have to experience and be connected to the mountains in this very life, which means letting go of what's comfortable at times, letting go of what's known. Don't get distracted on the side paths. And one very important point I want to illuminate different traditions around the world, they're connecting to these different gods, these different personalities. In Sanskrit, they are called devatas, different personifications of different impulses of nature. So these gods like Hades, Persephone, etc., they are empowered beings in charge of a particular aspect of material nature. So just like you have one international company, but there's one supreme boss of that company, and then all over the world there's managers, CEOs, people working in that company. So these devatas, they are like managers in different branches of that world enterprise, but there's only one supreme God. And then that one supreme God also has many names, but there's a graduation in these names, because so often our conception of the divine is very much mixed with our worldly experience here, and we superimpose that onto the divine reality. So when we hear this term God, etc., then we think, well, he must be the oldest being, so therefore he's got a grey beard and he's sitting on a cloud and he must be like a king or an emperor. All completely confused thinking based on our worldly experience. And then we superimpose that onto the divine reality. But interestingly, in Sanskrit, the term for the spiritual world, the spiritual plane of consciousness, is called Vaikunta. Vaikunta, no kunta, anxiety, the plane of no anxiety. So just try to feel in for a moment that plane of no anxiety. There's no scarcity, there's no lack, there's no war, there's no conflict, there's no necessity for the Supreme Creator to be sitting on a cloud looking at you doing another stupid thing waiting to judge you when you die. He's got his own life to live, actually. You're not that important, I'm sorry to say. So what is the divinity like in that plane of no anxiety, where there's no necessity for that personality to be like a creator, to be like a ruler? The two most important aspects on that plane of reality is beauty and love. So in Sanskrit, there's a word called Krish, and that means all of existence. And there's a word called Ananda. So Krishna is the name that addresses that form of the divine where the most beauty and the most love is personified in all of existence. So when you have there's like a Sanskrit word for God called Ishvara, which means the supreme controller, which is still related to being the controller of this material universe. So actually there's not so much love manifest in that. And so Krishna is the form of God where love and bliss is most manifest. But this may sound very one-sided. Oh, this guy's bloody religious nut just talking about the fucking male thing. What about the goddess? Okay, very good question. I'm glad you asked. So in the Brihad Gautamiya Tantra, it is said, Devi Krishna Mai Prokta Radhika Paradevata Sava Lakshmi Mai Smohi Kantari Para. And in the Chaitanya Chamrita, it is said, Radha Purna Shakti Krishna Purna Shakti Man Dua Bastu Vedanasi Sastra Praman. The lover and the beloved, Radha and Krishna, they are eternally one soul. But this one soul has become two, male and female, to exchange the flow of prema rasa, the flow of love. So that form of the divinity where the love is most manifest, the highest zenith of the lover and the beloved, that is Radha and Krishna. Today is Shivaratri, the appearance of Lord Shiva, and today he got married with his consort Parvati. They are all, it's a whole nother class, but they are 84%. So the love is 84% full moon in Shiva and Parvati, 96% Lakshmi Narayan, but 100% in Radha and Krishna. So in Radha and Krishna, Krishna is the supreme Adi Guru, the Guru of all Gurus. He is Avatari, the source of all avatars. Everything, Aham Savasya Prabhu Mataham Savatate Iti Macha Bhajante Mam Brabhavasam Andigitaha. Everything emanates from me, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. So that being, everything is emanated from. He is the supreme controller. Yogis are doing hard austerity for thousands and thousands of years in the Himalayas just to get one momentary glimpse of the tips of his toes. So how elevated is that personality? But this personality, Krishna, who is the guru of all gurus, his guru is the love of Srimati Radhika. So how high is Radharani? Krishna is like a puppet dancing to the strings of Radharani. So Radharani's position is so high. When Krishna is calling the flute, on one level he's calling all the jiva souls, all the individual souls towards the divine consciousness. But actually the inside deeply of his heart, he's just trying to call his beloved. You know, a couple of years ago I watched one Bollywood movie called Radhe Shyam, named for Radha and Krishna. And I watched the movie, I was like, oh, this will be about Radha and Krishna. And it was just some Bollywood movie, no Radha Krishna whatsoever. It was an okay movie. So then I looked it up. Why did they name it this? And there was a little interview with the director. And he said, you know, Radha and Krishna, they're the greatest love story ever. And all Bollywood movies, all dance, everything from the Indian subcontinent, it's inspired by the love of Radha and Krishna. Swami Shivananda of the Divine Life Society, he says that longing in the chanting of Sufism, that they are aspiring to follow the longing of Radharani to meet with her beloved. So Radha and Krishna, they're always eternally engaged in a flow of loving sentiment. But Radharani's love is so high, even Krishna himself is astonished by that love, and he's a disciple of that love. So our supreme good fortune is to become a servant of that love. And by becoming a servant of that love, we can enter into that plane of consciousness, and this is the highest thing available, actually, is to become a servant of love. Some people, they want to merge into oneness, but actually, if there's a jar of honey, do you want to become the honey, or do you want to taste the honey? So by merging into the oneness, there's no opportunity to taste the honey. So when there's two, there can be a flow of love, and then you can taste the honey. So the myths, they all have their origin in the Vedic paradigm, and the topmost zenith of the Vedic paradigm is the forms of God, where love, devotion, and bliss is the supreme, and that is Radha and Krishna. I could talk for hours more, but I'll have to wrap it up now. Is there any questions, thoughts, reflections?
As you were wrapping up there,
Mm-hmm.
you came to a few places which felt experientially different to where I've been.
Uh-huh.
So as the veil drops, I noticed that this becomes formless and extremely intimately something else. More. But it doesn't lose its lovingness. The intimacy is extreme, even though there's no experience it. And I can't quite relate to how you closed just now.
Perhaps you are familiar with the analogy of Plato's cave, which originally come from Socrates, but Socrates never wrote anything down. Just so we're all on the same page, there was a bunch of people living in a cave. There was a fire burning behind them, and all they could see were the shadows of the wall dancing from the fire. And they began to think that these shadows were the ultimate reality. They couldn't see the fire behind them. And then one day, one man comes in from outside the cave and says, "There's a whole reality out there. You should come with us." And then people were like, no, we'll just follow the science and we're quite happy here, thank you. And after quite some endeavor, he convinced a couple of them to come out of the cave. These people had been in there for such a long time. Dark cave. What's the first thing that you would see coming out of that cave? You'd be blinded to hell because it's bright as hell out there and you've been in a dark cave, right? You can't see anything. So when we are coming out of material consciousness into the spiritual domain, generally speaking, the first revelation is the light of the spiritual consciousness. And often there can be a metaphysical narrative that we dovetail towards that as being, okay, so the ultimate reality is then ultimately formless. Also, my experience of form here in the material world is always limited. So therefore, form must always be limited. But actually, just like in this Plato's cave analogy, as your vision adjusts, then you'll see there's a whole reality out there with people, with trees, with all kinds of beings. But you can't get to that reality by your own effort. You can get to the light by your own effort. But to get connected to the next step, you need to receive that transmission and connection from someone who is already abiding in that connection. And that is the place of Guru. So in modern times, we can only get so far to the formless. But for those very rare souls who really sincerely want to go all the way to the mountain, then there's a verse in the Yoga Sutras, for those who are eager, the goal is very close. So when that goal is really burning, really like a fire, then Sri Guru will come into your life and put your hand in God's hand, and then these esoteric things that I'm talking about, Radha and Krishna and their love, it's not some story or belief system. It'll be a real experience for you. thank you very much for your question. We can talk more outside if you like. I have to go because the next workshop is ready. Yes.